Speaker number 4 is code 4618, answering the question, will the supply chain crisis finally come to an end?
After Joe Biden's failure to pass comprehensive legislation to support America's supply chains, former President Bill Clinton actually came out and called on Biden to maintain his commitment to the American people. And you know you're in trouble when Bill Clinton is lecturing you on commitment. The federal government clearly has an obligation to help protect our economy, but right now, they've been failing. As Forbes explains earlier today, inflation has crossed past 9%, but for certain consumer goods like gas and food, it's beyond 40%. 80% of American families say that they are personally feeling the toll of inflation. And considering that the Financial Times explained on June 12th of this year that 86% of economists believe that we are headed towards a recession, it becomes increasingly critical that we ask today's question: will the supply chain crisis finally come to an end? And the answer is unfortunately no, because of significant economic barriers that stand in the way of a recovery. More specifically, first, labor shortages that hurt domestic manufacturing. Second, because foreign imports will remain low. And third, because elevated savings will increase consumer demand. In the movie series Mad Max, gas is a commodity so precious that people are willing to kill each other for just a few gallons. The movie was actually set in the future. I believe it was August. And while American consumers are clearly worried about increasing gas prices, this is a trend reflected all across the economy. And the primary reason why the supply chain crisis will not come to an end is because of significant labor shortages in the manufacturing sector. As the Financial Times explains on May 25th of this year, right now, there are 1.9 open job positions for every unemployed American. And in some states, like Kentucky, that number is 3.3 job openings. This significant amount of job openings versus employees means that companies can't find workers. And that's a significant problem in the manufacturing sector. When companies can't find workers, they have to raise wages to compete to win over these employees. But wage growth in manufacturing is just 0.4%, compared to nearly 5.5% across the economy overall. Therefore, CNN explains on May 4th of this year that the manufacturing sector is going to suffer shortages of 2.1 million workers over the next 8 years. These shortages are going to cost our economy $1 trillion in potential growth. All of these factors together mean that because of significant worker shortages all across the economy, America's manufacturing won't be able to keep up with demand, thereby meaning that our supply chains will remain broken. President Joe Biden recently came out with his economic relief plan, in which he promises not to raise taxes by a single penny, but instead by several trillion pennies. And while the federal government often faces criticism for their lack of foresight, that's actually the second major reason why our supply chains are not going to recover. Namely, because foreign imports will remain low in the future. As CNBC explains on June 6th of this year, a combination of COVID-19 lockdowns in other countries, along with delayed shipping containers and ports, means that America's imports are down 30% compared to before the pandemic. When we're importing $900 billion fewer goods every single year, that's something that's going to significantly hurt our economy. In fact, what that article goes on to explain is that before the pandemic, nearly 80% of American goods arrived on time. But today, that number is just 20%. The Hill explains on April 26th of this year that that has led companies to aggressively stockpiling goods, something that's going to hurt supply chains in the long term by adding unpredictability. Essentially, if every company chooses to stock up aggressively in July, then there'll be no demand in August, and that throws factories and supply chains out of whack. Therefore, because we're unable to import goods from foreign countries in the long term, and because companies' odd spending habits will continue to disrupt the economy, it means that our supply chains will not effectively recover. The White House recently realized that they don't have enough money for their aforementioned economic plan. But don't worry, they're working on a plan B. Unfortunately, the B stands for bake sale. And while the federal government simply doesn't have enough money for a lot of these programs, that actually explains the third major reason why our economy and supply chains are not going to recover. Because significant federal spending in the past has led to increased savings that will boost consumer demand. The Washington Post explains on February 23rd of this year that American savings are up $2.6 trillion compared to before the pandemic. That's because, as you all know, the government spent trillions of dollars on stimulus checks and unemployment, things that increased America's savings rate by nearly 4 times. This increased savings is leading to increased consumer spending now. As the McKinsey Institute explained on May 4th of this year, consumer spending is up 18% from before the pandemic. To give you some context for that number, if it wasn't for federal spending during this pandemic, consumer spending would only be up by roughly 6%. This increase in consumer spending is significantly increasing demand, and that's something that makes America's supply chains broken. When a lot of people are going out and buying goods, supply chains can't keep up, and factories get overwhelmed and can't keep up with the demand. Forbes continues to explain on June 9th of this year that because the savings are so dramatically high, increased consumer spending is going to continue through at least 2024, demonstrating that America's supply chains are not recovering anytime soon. So now, as we come back to today's question, which is, will America's supply chain crisis finally be resolved? The answer is unfortunately no, because America's supply chains face significant economic barriers. First, labor shortages that hurt manufacturing. Second, a lack of foreign imports. And third, because elevated savings boost consumer spending. So while Bill Clinton may not be happy with the state of its economy or his relationships, it's clear that the federal government can do a better job in the long term to protect our supply chains. Thank you.